Good morning. Hi, my name's John Ciaccio. I'm your host today for the Private Eye Nightline. We have Debbie O'Hara from Accredited Investigations, Inc. She's Director of Investigations for Accredited. We have her in the studio today. Hi, Debbie. How are you?
Good morning, John. Good.
Thank you for joining us today. Listeners, we've got a great show lined up for you today. It's about forensic testing, the different types of tests that forensic labs can perform. Those services, how a private investigator can introduce those services to their clientele. We have a Steve Calvert on the phone standing by. Steve's an experienced forensic and operates a lab out of Texas. In a little bit, we're going to hear from him and the different type of services his company offers, what's in store, how the long list of different type of tests, how to take samples, how to store them. It's going to be a real interesting show. Debbie, I tell you, I just love these kind of shows because, this kind of stuff it amazes me what we're able to do today with the technology and the forensics and what they're able to accomplish.
Definitely, and there's always something every day they're coming up with.
There is, and I remember, I've certainly been doing investigative work probably 28, 29 years, and 15, 20 years ago, our clients could never have access to the forensic or the tests that they have access to now.
No.
So let's get Steve Calvert on the phone. Steve, you there?
Yes, I am, John.
First,
good morning, John. Good morning, Debbie.
Good morning, Steve.
Good morning, Steve. Look, first, I want to thank you for taking the time. I know you're a very busy guy, so I want to thank you very much for taking the time to be on our show today. Steve, for our listeners, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're located, name of your company, so the listeners have an understanding.
Our primary company is located in Euless, Texas. That is called Semen and Sperm Detection Incorporated, and the symbols that we use is SSDI, and our main website is ssdi.pro, and that will give you access to all our resources for up to 20 websites, and about 4 of them are specifically set up to help private investigators.
Okay. Yeah, I was on there the other night. Really impressive. Full menu. As a private investigator, you could get lost in there with all the different type of tests that you offer. The forensic work. How long you been doing this, Steve?
We started in March of '99, filling a void for paternity tests. You literally could not purchase a paternity test online. There was no internet access or way to do that, and so our company was the first company to ever sell a home DNA test kit on the internet. And then that transgressed into another void, which was that forensic labs were inaccessible to private individuals for determining infidelity. And when they did finally come online in early 2000, the standard turnaround time was anywhere from 10 days to a month to just do a simple serology test. So beginning in 2000, we started learning the serology business, which is the study of bodily fluids. And in 2002, we started doing our own testing. So we have created a battery of tests that can be done within 24 hours and give most people the answers they need without even going into DNA extraction, which still takes approximately 5-7 business days to get results on DNA testing.
Yeah, Steve, I can tell you, as a private investigator for about 28 years now, I remember 20 years ago, none of this stuff, you couldn't even imagine that you could have access to it. And normally, paternity tests or so forth, you would have to get an attorney, get a court order, and all that. Now, private clients through private investigators and a company like yours can get quick answers.
That is true. We can determine whether there's a viable substance on a sample that will most likely produce a DNA profile prior to going into testing, and A lot of times when a private investigator brings us a bag of trash, that's very useful to do serology to find out what has blood and what has saliva and what has semen on it, because those typically will produce a very robust profile.
Before we go further on the type of services, how does a private investigator, they get a client and they want to sample either a semen or, saliva or whatever test. You're in Texas, but correct me if I'm wrong. You work for private investigators all over the country.
That is correct, and there are two different ways to go about it. A lot of people are just trying to get an idea what's going on, and they don't need to have evidence for court. They're not expected to produce trial evidence, and so you can send the sample directly to us without a legal chain of custody, and we'll run the test quickly and provide the results, and those are called peace of mind test. And then there's a formal legal test when you're expecting that it may develop into a court case, whether it be legal, civil, or criminal, and those require special documentations for sending the sample. You have to have a chain of custody and what's called an evidence submission form, and then that creates a legal case. But we receive both types of cases from the private investigators, and it's all based on what your client is telling you when they come in to obtain the knowledge of what they're needing, such as infidelity. They might want to know if their wife is cheating on them, so we simply get a pair of their panties, and in most cases, the states are no-fault states, so if you know she's cheating, most people don't want to air their dirty laundry in court, so they just want to do that for peace of mind. And then you might have a sexual assault case where like it might be molestation of a child or a minor, and those cases normally come in with a chain of custody so that we can go and produce trial evidence and do expert witness testimony when required.
Steve, if somebody does have a sample, whether it's a semen sample or a blood sample, and they want to send it in, what's the best way they should package it?
Well, first of all, just about any sample that you obtain, and there's virtually no exception to the rule, you just let it dry at room temperature, whether it be a Coke can, cigarette butts, chewing gum, a blood stain, semen. Try to get it on something that is sterile or clean, such as a Kleenex or a cotton swab that's in a sterile package. You want to try to avoid using Q-tips. Q-tips have problems because typically somebody has dipped their hands in a box of Q-tips multiple times. But the important thing is to let it dry at room temperature and never put it in a plastic bag. We receive too many samples in plastic bags that do not produce good profiles, because once you trap moisture, you're promoting bacteria growth.
So on the samples, then, they should just use a sterile type of environment and then put it, dry it out and secure it in a brown paper bag, not a plastic bag or any container that causes to have moisture form.
It's just a number 10 envelope, a manila envelope, a 9 by 10, paper lunch bag, just about anything that has never been used before. You don't want to have something that people have put their hands in, and just set it inside. For instance, you get a water bottle. Those work great for getting somebody's DNA profile off of. So anything that touches the lips multiple times, such as a water bottle, a glass, a drinking straw, you just put that inside a paper envelope and leave the envelope open if you can for a couple hours and let everything dry out. And if you have a water bottle and there's a lot of water left in the bottle, just punch a hole in the bottom, let the water drain out, and let it sit at room temperature until it's dry, and then send it in a paper envelope. In some cases, there's no choice. Things are fished out of toilets and things come in saturated, and they can't be helped to put those into a plastic bag. for reasons that they just would leak through everything otherwise. And when that happens, they just need to call us so that we can give them very specific instructions based on the sample. For instance, you may need to put it on a cold pack. You may need to put it on dry ice. And so we receive things like fecal matter, and that has to be quick frozen and sent within a few hours, or at least put on dry ice within a few hours of obtaining it if you want any chance for that to work, because it's pure bacteria. So there are special circumstances for 90% of the samples. Just let them dry at room temperature and try to keep handling them.
Okay. Steve, I want to go back to the, in our business, the chain of evidence, the continuity of the evidence. You're right. We do the peace of mind, like infidelity, whether it be surveillance or those kind of items. Really, the courts don't want to engage in, who did what. Let's move on with the divorce. But a lot of clients still want that peace of mind or the truth. But then there are other things we do for the protecting, the evidence and creating the chain of evidence. When we come back, we're going to go to break here, but when we come back, I want to ask you what's the best way to get you the samples, because you're in Texas and I understand you do work all over the country for PIs to send you the samples. So when we get back, we're going to talk a little bit more about that chain of custody. Also, when we come back, I think it's important that we give the listeners an idea of what type of tests and how it can, the correlation, what that test could do. Like for instance, can you do lipstick on a collar to determine, any saliva out of the lipstick or whatever. So when we come back, what we're going to do is go on break now, and we'll continue. Steve, thanks for sticking with us. We'll be with you shortly.
Accredited Investigations Incorporated offers a wide array of investigative services to law firms, insurance companies, individuals, private organizations, and corporations. Our goal is to reach the case objectives and resolve the client's issues as quickly and cost-effectively as possible. Local investigative services include identity, wrongful death, drug, alcohol, and abuse, and divorce, support, custody, and family investigations. For more information, call or click today. Accredited Investigations, when you need to know.
Accredited Investigations Incorporated. Professional, licensed private detectives with over 28 years of experience, providing comprehensive nationwide services. Our extensive and diverse team offers discreet and confidential consultations. Our state-of-the-art technology and investigative resources allow us to stay in front of other investigative companies. We welcome the opportunity to earn your trust and deliver you the best service in the industry. Call Accredited Investigations Incorporated at 866-821-5258.
You're listening to the Private Eye Nightline with host John Ciaccio. To ask a question or express a concern about today's program, please call toll-free 1-866-472-5788, 1-866-472-5788. You may also send an email to info@pinightline.com. Now, back to the show.
Okay, thank you, listeners, for standing by. Again, John Ciaccio. I'm your host today for the Private Eye Nightline. We have Debbie O'Hara in the studio from Accredited Investigations, and we have Steve Calvert on the phone out of Texas. Steve, you still with us, right?
Yes, I am, John.
Okay, good. Prior to break, want to talk about what some of the topics or issues that we were talking about right prior to break. How does a private investigator get you samples?
Okay, the best thing to do is to go to our website if you're a first-time submitter, because we have all the proper forms for the chain of custody. So our website will teach you how to fill out the chain of custody, which is basically a cover letter from your organization specifying how you obtain the sample, a little bit about the sample, and that establishes the initial chain of custody. You can't just send us a sample and say, I'm sending you this sample. You have to identify the sample, how you obtain the sample, what the sample is, and the purpose of your test. Then you also get an evidence submission form from the website, and that is an ISO 17025 accredited requirement that a legal case be initiated with an evidence submission form, and that is where you specify exactly what testing you want performed. And if there's any questions at all, you can call our main number, which is 817-283-6379, and just ask for help, and we will guide you every step of the way through the process.
That's interesting, Steve. So, in essence, it's not only sending you the sample, but you want a history on that sample, how it was obtained, the reason, what type of test, everything, how they forwarded the sample to you. You want a history of that sample as well.
Yes, the sample is treated no different than if you had gone into the hospital and had a rape kit performed on you. They would create a legal chain. It would have the investigator. It would have who took the samples. It would have the attending nurse. It would say everything about the case, and that document would follow the package all the way to the very end, which would include anything that's presented in trial.
Okay.
The next step that's very important is that the samples are sent to us by a traceable means. And even with the advent of priority mail, which is a very expensive method, a 2-day priority mail package is only $5, and you can get delivery confirmation, and that suffices for cases. Most companies want quick results for their serology, so we receive overnight FedEx packages every morning, and that those samples that come in by 9:30 are tested, and the report is released the same day that they come in when you're ordering a semen, sperm, saliva, or blood detection.
When a private investigator requests this and everything and sends you the sample with a history, overnight or FedEx package, whatever it means, once you receive it, what's the time frame usually for like a semen test, or what's usually the turnaround time?
Our turnaround time, we're at 98% of completing the test the same day if they arrive by noon.
Wow.
So, and that is for serology. That's one of the advantages of our company over most other labs. There are minimum 10 business days, and some are up to 6 months for analysis reports. So we have a unique situation that we have 3 forensic technicians that can perform the serology testing, and we are running the test upon arrival. So within typically an hour of the receipt of your sample, it's actually back in the lab being tested.
Well, you talk about fast. Wow. Mm-hmm. All right, Steve, let's give our listeners an idea, the different type of tests that you perform and why those tests may be helpful. Of course, it's a no-brainer. Semen is to determine if your spouse is having sex. But can you give our listeners an idea of what type of tests your labs perform and how it could correlate to a type of, a saliva test? The other day we talked about, a stalking case about identifying a saliva on the back of a envelope. So could you talk to, give our listeners an idea on the type of tests that you perform there?
Yes, and envelopes are a common item to receive. The thing about harassing envelopes is that the majority of those come in on self-stick envelopes. Too many people watch the CSI shows these days. They know that DNA can come off of an envelope, and you're likely to get an envelope closed by a glue stick or buy a self-seal envelope. They're very careful. In fact, in some cases, they may even try to get somebody else to lick the envelope to throw off the case. So in those, in getting envelopes, the envelopes that work more frequently are the ones that come in from your parents, and you want to know if that's really your dad. Then we do extractions on envelopes that somebody gets by a birthday card or just a general letter. And those we can test in advance for saliva before we do the DNA testing. But most customers just want to go into DNA testing. And so we actually take the area, clean off the envelope, and punch through the area where you lick. The cells are trapped in the moisture band or the glue band in between the flaps, and we take that and then we just dissolve that in lysis buffer, and we can typically get a good DNA profile from any envelope as long as it's licked. And our best cases that we have obtained a good profile off a 70-year-old stamp. And so you never know what you're going to get, but typically the majority of harassing envelopes come in and they flatline on the DNA. And the reason is that people just know better than to lick something that you're going to send off to harass somebody else with.
That's interesting, Steve. During the break, Debbie was asking, pointing out something. How long can the samples, that you obtain, how long or how old can you work with a sample? And you just said that you recovered from a stamp from 70 years ago, a test.
The whole key is what type of cell structure it is and how it's trapped. Most people think that hair is a very good sample, but we can go into a grave for an exhumed body and take part of the scalp, and that doesn't work, even though that has hair follicles, obviously. Hair follicles degrade with time, so that's not the best sample, but when cells are trapped and they're dried at room temperature and there's not a bacterial attack performed on them, there's really no time limit. We've received stains off of shed tools that were 30 or 40 years old that worked just well, just like they were just obtained that day. So the big misnomer is that hair is a good sample and works all the time, and we have more problems with hair than probably any other sample.
Well, let's give the listeners some ideas of what in your opinion is some of the best samples to get. Is it like you were talking earlier, a water bottle, or if you had a preference?
Well, cigarette butts work 100% of the time. So if you can get 3 cigarette butts from the person, then those work well. Also, anything that touches the lips, such as a drinking straw, Coke can, water bottle, anything that repetitively touches the lips. If you send in a sample that's like a shirt with a lipstick stain on it, what we do is we perform a saliva detection on that first, and if we detect saliva, we give the saliva detection a rating, and the rating will be tied to a specific chance of obtaining a DNA profile. So you may receive a serology report that says you have a 90% chance of obtaining a DNA profile, because we look at all the samples that were obtained and the outcome of the test and the outcome of the DNA, and we reply in the report with real-time statistics that say how successful this profile could be from that stain. So on good stains, semen with sperm works the majority of time unless it's very moldy. If anything looks like it has mold or mildew on it, then that's just almost ruined, because the DNA primers cannot attach correctly and amplify the profile out. So on other special samples that we commonly get, envelopes do work the majority of time as long as they're not related to harassment. Anything with blood on it, a shirt, a blood stain, a Band-Aid. We've obtained samples from forensic companies that are in product liability cases, such as we had blood on a McDonald's French fry package. We've had blood on a pill. We've had blood on a hamburger bun. And we've had blood on a Band-Aid stuck in a moldy cheese package. And every one of those produced a very robust profile. So dried blood is a very good source of DNA.
Okay.
And,
sounds to me that it's, the work you do, it could be for corporate America, it could be for a private client hiring a private investigator. So your service is full range of different types of services you offer, from corporate America, product tampering, or a liability to prove other people. It's interesting.
And most people do obtain information through a private investigator or an attorney because they want to make sure that they're, following something that can be submitted as court evidence. When our most popular sample that we receive that does not come in from private investigators is just their wife's panties. That's our number one received serology sample.
And where do you get that from? Do you usually get that right from the client themselves, or through an attorney?
Yes, we receive those every day. It's something that's very easy, and the reason is we're able to tell when the last time she had intercourse is, and if the sample is totally clear, then there's no possibility that she was ejaculated in within 5 days. So if it is positive, we'll give you the timeline in hours from the time she wore them to when she had intercourse last, and that goes for a sample that's obtained yesterday or something that you might have held for several years and send it in. If you know the wear date, then the timeline will be applicable, so you can find out exactly when she last had intercourse. And in many cases, we'll receive a pair of panties where the spouse had an outing, was at a party, and things are suspicious, and we test it, and the test is positive, but the timeline doesn't match up. And in those types of cases, those typically go back and match the spouse from a previous encounter rather than the actual suspected infidelity of happening at the party the previous night.
Wow.
So
all right, Steve, let me interrupt you.
Very useful to most people, and we're the only company that is accredited that can produce that type of information.
All right, Steve, let me interrupt you because we're going to go to break again here, but we're going to stay on that issue when we come back from break. So stay with us, Steve. And listeners, it's getting interesting. We'll be with you shortly.
Accredited Investigations Incorporated offers a wide array of investigative services to law firms, insurance companies, individuals, private organizations, and corporations. Our goal is to reach the case objectives and resolve the client's issues as quickly and cost-effectively as possible. Local investigative services include identity, wrongful death, drug, alcohol, and abuse, and divorce, support, custody, and family investigations. For more information, call or click today. Accredited Investigations, when you need to know.
Accredited Investigations Incorporated. Professional, licensed private detectives with over 28 years of experience, providing comprehensive nationwide services. Our extensive and diverse team offers discreet and confidential consultations. Our state-of-the-art technology and investigative resources allow us to stay in front of other investigative companies. We welcome the opportunity to earn your trust and deliver you the best service in the industry. Call Accredited Investigations Incorporated at 866-821-5258.
You're listening to the Private Eye Nightline with host John Ciaccio. To ask a question or express a concern about today's program, please call toll-free 1-866-472-5788, 1-866-472-5788. You may also send an email to info@pinightline.com. Now, back to the show.
Okay, thank you, listeners, for sticking with us. John Ciaccio, I'm your host for the Private Eye Nightline. Debbie O'Hara from Accredited Investigations in the studio. We have Steve Calvert on the phone out of Texas talking about forensic lab services his company performs. Prior to break, Steve, I want to go back to that because I found that really interesting. So you're telling me and our listeners that there's a test out there that you can determine that that your spouse had sex and how long ago within the time frame that spouse had sex?
That is correct. In about 2005, we started keeping very detailed notes of every outcome of the test, and we actually developed a rating system, and it had to do with a quantifiable amount of semen in a stain and how 3 different methods to detect it. And so we developed a matrix, and we monitored the matrix until about 2007 while we were asking clients for their feedback on each case and noting the feedback. And then we developed a table, basically an Excel spreadsheet that converted into a database calculation spreadsheet that when you input all the numbers of the test, then we can tell you when the ejaculation occurred based on when she wore the panties. And that combined with our new test, which is we're developing a test. We're the only company that has it because we're developing it. It's sperm protein, and it's a SP10 test, which is specific for the protein in the acrosome layer of sperm. So even if we obtain a sample and we can't see sperm underneath the microscope, in many cases we're able to detect that the sperm has degraded in the sample, and a lot of times that is useful, especially when the husband is vasectomized and we're detecting sperm protein on a sample. That also gives them useful information, and when we detect sperm protein, we know that we're going to get a good DNA sample off the profile.
Wow.
Off the sample. So it's another useful tool that we've added, and we're in validation process of that, and we're trying to market that to the crime labs. No crime lab uses it or has that capability, and we're in the final stages of validating it by running a species study against the San Diego frozen zoo animals so that we can prove that it does not cross-react with other species, and then we'll be ready to present that to the crime labs.
Yeah, I mean, as a private investigator, and we've done a lot of criminal work over the years here, that test alone will establish a timeline, okay? And it could be very important, not only in the criminal cases a private investigator does, but the civil side, the infidelities alone. It will give you a timeline when your spouse had sex.
Well, we are excluded as being able to present the data in a criminal case because those have enough problems on their own, and they're requiring that DNA profile match the contributor. Of course, you've seen all the people that are getting out because they're able to go back to these 30-year-old rape kids and run them for the first time because there's a lot of money coming into those grants to go back and pull those cases and run them, and people are getting out of jail because they have a good sample still on file, and it doesn't match the person that they've locked up. So when you sit there and report the time frame of a rape in a criminal case, it has no bearing because they're going to need to get the DNA off that sample and make sure that it matches the suspect, and they don't care when the rape occurred based on when you test her panties.
Right.
For instance, there's ways that you can mask the evidence. If you were to go and have intercourse and sit on a bidet or get in a hot tub, naturally that skews the timeline, and so it can be modified, especially with somebody that knows that the capability exists to detect that. And the ISO accreditation, we have been specifically prohibited from presenting this information for sexual assault cases, but we can provide it for legal infidelity cases.
Okay, and certainly that on the civil side for the infidelity, that will establish a time frame too.
Absolutely, it's been incredibly useful. Only 8% of our customers that send in samples for serology will go into DNA testing. So within one day, you'll have your answer, and 92%, a little bit over 92% of the customers are completely finished with their case the day that we receive the sample, rather than waiting for DNA results to come back.
You know, Steve, you said that, you know, as far as tainting the different type of samples, how would, in a saliva, if you had a drink, alcohol, would that interfere with the, you know, if I put alcohol in a water bottle with water, would that interfere with the sample?
Not at all, not unless you took a Kleenex or a rag and wiped the lip of the bottle off with the alcohol. Alcohol is a fairly decent cleaning tool if you mix it with water. It doesn't clean that well if it's straight, like ethanol and 95%, what they call Everclear. You need to bring it down to about 70% concentration, and then it's an excellent cleaning tool, and it's used by most labs to clean surfaces.
No, I mean, say, you know, a client of mine's spouse was out in a bar and was, you know, involved with a female, and he was putting the shots down, or beer, or 7 and 7s, and a saliva test, could that interfere with that type of alcohol?
Not at all. Just pour the alcohol out of the glass and send us a glass, and as long as it's touched his lips a few times, we'll be able to get a good profile off of it. The downside to some of those is that sometimes somebody else will taste the drink or try it, and you may get multiple contributors, and it makes it more difficult to say this is a match with 1 in 6,000,000,000 when there's multiple contributors. The report instead will say that this person cannot be excluded as being a contributor to the glass.
That's almost like fingerprinting.
Right. All right, so let me give you another example. You know, a client calls our office and says, I found a used condom in my house, and I approached my husband. He's denying it. He's saying it must have been his son's. I approached my son, and he says, no. You can perform you have to do a couple different tests first. Number one, right, to determine if that condom, is there any traceable DNA on it, then you have to match that, right?
Yes, in a lot of cases it works both ways. Sometimes the wife finds it and the husband denies it, and that's actually easier because then we're just after the male profile. So we'll go into the condom and take the semen out of it and run a PowerPlex profile, and then that will even could be matched up to prove that it's not his son or his brother. If it's for the husband finding the condom and trying to prove that it's his wife, and he can also prove that it's not his semen, because there's been many cases where somebody might be inebriated and use a condom and not remember it. So those cases come in, and the outside of the condom will match the wife, and then the wife is still saying that she didn't have sex with anybody else but him. So then we turn around and do the semen in the condom and show that it matches the husband, who, you know, just totally forgot that he had sex with her.
Steve, how would you take a used condom that could be the husband's and he's denying it? How would you prove it's him? You'd have to take a saliva test?
Yeah, there's control samples. We send out a kit, and in many cases the spouse doesn't want to know that they're being tested. So again, you go and you get a water bottle, chewing gum, cigarette butts or something, and you can do your work in advance of the other person actually knowing that he's being checked out, because if it doesn't match them, it matches one of the kids instead, then you don't want to start World War III until you're sure that the evidence is substantial.
Right.
All right. So what are some of the other lab tests that you perform for private investigators or, attorneys on behalf of their clients? We're going to go to break now, Steve, in a little bit. I want you to think about when we come back from break, some of the different tests that you perform. And how involved is it with the blood samples? I know the infidelity has got to be a big part. We get calls a lot here, and I know in the past, Debbie, right? We've done this.
Oh, definitely, yeah. Lots.
Well, I can talk specifically about a few cases that we've done that are interesting, and we can expand from that after the break.
All right, sounds good. So we're going to go to break, and when we come back, we'll pick up with Steve Calvert and Debbie O'Hare. Thank you.
Accredited Investigations Incorporated offers a wide array of investigative services to law firms, insurance companies, individuals, private organizations, and corporations. Our goal is to reach the case objectives and resolve the client's issues as quickly and cost-effectively as possible. Local investigative services include identity, wrongful death, drug, alcohol, and abuse, and divorce, support, custody, and family investigations. For more information, call or click today. Accredited Investigations, when you need to know.
Accredited Investigations Incorporated. Professional, licensed private detectives with over 28 years of experience, providing comprehensive nationwide services. Our extensive and diverse team offers discreet and confidential consultations. Our state-of-the-art technology and investigative resources allow us to stay in front of other investigative companies. We welcome the opportunity to earn your trust and deliver you the best service in the industry. Call Accredited Investigations Incorporated at 866-821-5258.
You're listening to the Private Eye Nightline with host John Ciaccio. To ask a question or express a concern about today's program, please call toll-free 1-866-472-5788, 1-866-472-5788. You may also send an email to info@pinightline.com. Now, back to the show.
Okay, thank you, listeners, for standing by. Steve Calvert with us today. Steve, if you would, we're in the last segment of our show, so I think it's very important. I want private investigators and clients or listeners to know and how to reach out to you. So before we continue, I want you to give them the contact information, your website, your phone number again. Okay, Steve?
Our special website set up for private investigators is infidelityprivateinvestigator.com. And our main website that will give you links to access all of our websites is ssdi.pro. And our main corporate website is dnatestingcenter.net. And our phone number is 817-283-6379.
Okay. All right, Steve. Prior to break, you said that you have some old cases that you're able to talk about. Can you tell us and our listeners a little bit about some of the past cases you were involved in?
Okay. One of the interesting ones we did not too long ago is where the police had shot a man, and he was accusing the police of shooting him before they needed to, because they had said that he raised his gun up and was going to shoot the police. He had a gun in his hand, and they obtained the bullet from the wall and that had gone through his hand, and we received the bullet and did a serology test on it and told them the relative chance of obtaining a DNA profile, which they went forward with that. We got a very good, robust profile, and we matched it to the suspect and proved that his hand was at such an angle that it wasn't possible that he had brought his gun up to fire, and he got off totally off of the charges of doing that. In fact, the police were reprimanded for that case.
Wow.
And another one was that they went inside an apartment and obtained syringes with drugs in them, and the person who owned the apartment wasn't even aware that the party had taken place, and that he denied having anything to do with any of it. So they brought the syringes here. We did serology on them, determined that there was enough blood inside the syringes from the drawback, and then we took the blood out and we ran a test and proved that the contributor was excluded, or the suspect was excluded, and he got off of that charges totally. So there's a vast array of testing that you can do. Infidelity is a big part of our business, but one of the things that is important is when you do a Powerplex profile off any stain or any item, it becomes sex-typed. So you always get the amylogen line. It's a short allele that almost works first before any other marker works. So you get to know the sex of it. Even from a fingerprint, you can determine the sex if you can lift the fingerprint with tape and we run it. You may not get a full profile, but the chances of getting the sex type is very substantial. So,
wow, that's pretty interesting. Is that just from a fingerprint, even if it's a partial print, there may be enough from that print to identify at least the sex of the individual.
Yes, there's quite a variety of ways of lifting a print, and most of the ones that we receive tape on, they will produce a partial profile. And if you feel that it is a male, then we have a more sensitive test that negates any type of female contamination. That's called a Y-plex test, and it's just testing the Y chromosomes. So that's a very useful tool when you know that you're going only after a male and you don't care if there's any female contamination. Then when that flatlines, you've done everything you can DNA-wise, and you know that you will not obtain a Powerplex profile. So we do that type, and we do all types of sibling study, family reconstructions. A lot of times there's cases where you have a long-lost person that you think might be related to your family, and we can trace the paternal lineage or the maternal lineage, and there's different types of tests. You can either do a Y-plex for a paternal line or a mitochondrial test for the maternal line. So,
Steve, do you do a lot of drug testing?
We don't do any drug testing.
You don't do any whatsoever? Okay.
No. We've totally stayed out of the drug testing business. There's quite a few drug testing companies out there, and it's we receive drug testing evidence such as urine cups where people are disputing the results. We need 10 milliliters of urine, and we can get a good profile and then show that it wasn't that person's urine. And that's when we get involved in drug testing, is when they have taken a hair sample or taken a urine sample. In many cases, people lose their jobs, and the lab has made a mistake.
Sure.
All right. So said no drug testing, but it's interesting on that syringe, on that case you're talking about, the syringe. You could tie it was a drug-related case, but you can tie that he was not the user of that syringe by performing a test, and that's interesting. The fact that you can identify a sex from a partial print is interesting. I know, many times we would go into businesses to determine, who wiped out the cash box and those kind of things. That would be very interesting, even on a partial print, to identify the sex. You can eliminate, a lot of suspects.
Yes, we recently had a case, and it's a local case, and they called us and said that somebody had peed out in a bottle by the storage lockers, and they wanted to match it up, but they had about 50 employees involved, but they had it narrowed down to half a dozen. So they brought the urine in, and we tested it first, and we made sure it was urine, and then we spun the profile out, and it was female, and they only had one female working in that area, and they went and confronted her, and she quit.
Wow.
So it didn't even require anything further, that we didn't even have to match it up to her. She just knew she was caught, and that was before getting any control samples.
Steve, also, I wanted to mention the fact that you mentioned to me the other day that your company has just become accredited.
Yes, after a 6-month hard investigation and being inspected and going through an internal audit, we became accredited on June 21st, and that makes us the only standalone serology accredited forensic lab in existence.
Wow, so that accreditation is compared to your competition, you stand alone now.
Well, the competition has always been against DNA labs because they do serology as a sideline business. There's not a DNA lab in existence that really likes to do serology. When you talk to them, they'll tell you that it takes 10 days to get your serology results, and they really would prefer you just to go right to DNA and skip the serology altogether. And so we filled that void back in about 2002 because when we were doing DNA testing and needing serology in advance, all the DNA labs were taking way too long for something we felt shouldn't be, so that we had set up the system to streamline that, and we never wanted to do DNA. So our lab does not do DNA profiling. We have contracts with multiple ISO 17025 and American Association of Blood Bank Laboratories, and we will still obtain, if you go directly to them, you will end up paying more than going through us because of our pricing contracts with them. We're still selling below their retail, so you have an advantage to bring your DNA profiling to us as well as the serology testing. With the one-day turnaround time, you can't go wrong with that because most people are on pins and needles while they're waiting to find out if they have anything that could be useful.
Yeah, especially on the private sector side, when you're talking infidelity, the emotions are raw, and clients, customers want those answers ASAP.
Well, it's very useful to a private investigator when he has a client that comes in one day and asks for a sample to be analyzed, and the private investigator calls him back the next morning with the results, because we received the sample by FedEx around 9:30, and we'll call the private investigator back typically within a couple hours, give them the results verbally. The report may not be released for several more hours. There's more to the paperwork than there is to the testing, and that's thanks to the ISO 17025 accreditation.
Yeah, Steve, I mean, with that kind of turnaround, I know as a successful businessman for the last 28 years, I've owned many investigative companies, and when you can offer that kind of service to your customers, your clientele, with that kind of turnaround, yeah, that private investigator is looking really good. Well, Steve, guess what? It's time to end our show today. You've been a great guest today, and I know our listeners really enjoyed with the knowledge that you have. Again, I learn every day in this business. So,
thank you, John, and thank you, Debbie.
Thank you, Steve. It was very interesting.
Everybody, Steve Calvert, really appreciate him being with us on the show today. Again, thank you, Steve. Listeners, we'll see you next Friday, okay? So stay tuned.
Thank you.
And thank you, Steve.
Thanks again for joining us this week. The Private Eye Nightline will be back next Friday morning at 7 a.m. Pacific Time, 10 a.m. Eastern Time on the Voice America Variety Channel. John Ciaccio hopes to have you tune in again next week.